Greetings, my dears. I'm always so happy to reunite with you. These tutorials on how to manage your menopause your way are just such fun for me. I love guiding you through the information that will enable you to have a great menopausal journey. I kind of feel like a travel guide. And just like this travel guidebook, my goal is to give you the tools to navigate on your own. This is tutorial 91, and as with all my videos, it will help you to better utilize the options available for managing your menopause your way. This is yet another tutorial for which you don't need my menopause book. The material we'll discuss today is sprinkled all throughout the book. I'm consolidating it for you in this video. So when it comes to travel, you can use a travel guide or a travel guidebook. Either one will pave the way, so to speak, for your journey. And the topic for today is guidelines. Have you ever heard that word? It is in medicine what this travel guide is to travel. I'm going to be telling you how to make sense of guidelines for menopause. This will be a very useful video for you. I promise you that watching this will help you navigate in the world of medical guidelines and learn how to accomplish all your goals. Okay, so you've probably heard the word guidelines before. Do you know what it means? Do you know how guidelines are developed? Let's start by defining the word as it's used in the medical arena. Guidelines are clinical practice recommendations for when to have a medical screening test, procedure, or treatment. They sort of standardize the way we practice medicine. In other words, they serve the purpose of helping different medical professionals practice similarly. There are guidelines for just about everything in medicine. For instance, there are guidelines on when you should get immunizations, how often you should get a pap smear, how often you should get a mammogram, and when you should start bone density testing. In the last 11 tutorials, I've told you all about the estrogen window of opportunity, and I've taught you that it's the first 5 to 10 years of your postmenopause. I've explained the necessary dosage of estrogen to prevent diseases associated with menopause, and you've learned how to determine how long you should take estrogen if you want those benefits. So in a sense, I was giving you the guidelines for estrogen replacement at menopause. You can think of guidelines as a roadmap, a set of rules for medical tests and procedures. But there's a big qualification. They are not carved in stone. You know, not everyone who uses this guidebook will go to the same cities or visit the same sites in any given city. Likewise, not everyone should follow the same medical guidelines. I think the best way to understand medical guidelines is to understand how they're made in the first place. That way you can better apply them to yourself. So here's what happens. A big group of individuals gets together on a national or international level, and these include clinicians, insurance companies, individual patients, equipment manufacturers, public health authorities, and health organizations. And the goal of the meeting is to decide the circumstances under which patients should have a particular test or procedure. The goal is to standardize medical care. It works like this. Let's say the group is just trying to decide when women should get a pap smear for early detection of cervical cancer. The group addresses all of the following. How many women are there in the community? How common is cervical cancer? How easy is it to get a pap smear? How much does it cost to do a pap smear? How many cases of cervical cancer will they find early How many lives will it save? How much are they willing to spend in order to save those lives? So the very first thing I want you to notice about guidelines is that they are designed for the population at large. They are not designed for you, the individual patient. Guideline makers are saying, how much are we willing to spend to save lives on a population-wide basis? You don't think that way. You think in terms of how much you want to save your own life. Guidelines will tell you what your doctor will offer you. More likely, they're going to tell you what your insurance will pay for. They may not have anything to do with what's really best for you. Now, the good thing about guidelines is that they lay out a general schedule of how often you should get your pap smear and other medical tests. The bad thing about guidelines is that some patients and some doctors use them as if they're carved in stone. They become inflexible, and they apply them regardless of the circumstances. I want you to know that you can modify them. Another problem is that guidelines change from time to time. And when they change, they confuse both patients and physicians. For instance, there have been recent changes in guidelines for mammograms. And those changes caused a frenzy of upset for patients who thought the previous guidelines were wrong. A change in guidelines does not mean the previous guidelines were wrong. Remember, guidelines are not about what's best for the individual patient. A change in guidelines may mean that they had to cut back on how much they spent on a particular test. Or it may mean that the cost of doing the procedure has increased. It may even mean that patients resisted getting the test and they've decided to use those resources elsewhere. Or it may reflect a failure to save as many lives as anticipated. So a change in guidelines is not necessarily a bad thing. But the new guidelines are not carved in stone any more than the old ones were. But you know, a change in guidelines can cause problems. What if you want to follow an old set of guidelines, but your insurance company institutes the new set, which doesn't suit you as well? And your insurance will only pay if you follow the new guidelines. Remember, cost is one of the factors that goes into developing guidelines in the first place. The new guidelines may cost less for society as a whole. Another problem with guidelines is that there may be multiple organizations, all with different guidelines for the very same test. And the differences can be significant. If that's the case, how do you know which set of guidelines to follow? How do you know which ones your doctor follows? What if there are multiple sets of guidelines from different organizations in effect at the very same time? And what if the recommendations for each conflicts with the others? That is the case with both mammogram and bone density guidelines right now. And there are proponents and opponents of each set of guidelines. What if you disagree with the guidelines? This guidebook says to spend at least 2 days, 2 whole days at the Louvre Museum. What if I don't love museums? If that's the case, I may decide to spend that time doing something I prefer. And the same is true of following medical guidelines. You have to tailor them to yourself. So let's say, what if you have a very high risk for osteoporosis. You know, I've taught you that you lose 2% of your bone per year in the first 5 years of your postmenopause. So let's say you go to your doctor when you become postmenopausal at age 51, and you ask for your first bone density test to use as a baseline. But your doctor says the guidelines recommend your first bone density test at age 65. He sees no reason for you to get one before then, and he says it's because your insurance won't pay for it. Now you might think I'm making this up. I'm not. That very example is the current reality. This kind of thing happens all the time. So what should you do? By golly, you should go right ahead and get your bone density tested, even if you have to pay for it yourself. Ah, but did you balk at that last part about paying for it yourself? Why? Do you buy vitamins and minerals with your own money? You see, sometimes you have to take charge of your own medical care, and that may mean paying for it yourself. I guarantee if you prevent osteoporosis by so doing, it's worth every single penny. I believe it's all about peace of mind. I think peace of mind is everything. But guidelines are not developed for your peace of mind. They're developed for the population's pocketbook. One of the reasons I teach you the facts and help you tailor the information to your own situation is so that you can decide how to do what gives you the best help and the most peace of mind. The key is to understand that medical guidelines were not developed for you personally, just as this travel book was not designed specifically for you. Think of the thousands of people who use this book to guide them through France. Do you think they all have identical trips? Of course not. Well, medical guidelines are like this travel guide. They are nothing more than a suggestion. The problem is that you buy your travel guide with your own money. I mean, you go to the bookstore, you flip through all the different travel books, and then you choose the one that suits you because it appeals to you most, right? But you don't do that when it comes to your medical insurance or your medical care. With those things, there are many layers between you as the consumer and those who are making the rules. The rules or guidelines are for the masses. They are not for you personally. If you want to do things your way, you absolutely should, but you might have to foot the bill. Even if you live in a country with universal health care, there are guidelines. And if you want the national or governmental health service to pay for your care, you have to follow the guidelines. If you want to modify the guidelines, you might have to pay for the extras that aren't in the guidelines. I'm a huge advocate for doing things your way. Please don't settle for less than you want. My goal is to teach you how to work within the system or even around the system to get what you want. And sometimes that requires knowing behind the scenes information like how guidelines work. That's why I take the time to teach this very practical stuff to you, like I have in this tutorial. In summary, just know that guidelines in medicine are a set of suggestions for when to get a test or procedure, but they weren't designed for you personally. Discuss the guidelines with your doctor, but don't feel restricted by them. Just as there are many options for managing your menopause, there are many options for guidelines. Do what gives you the most peace of mind, not what the guide dictates. I'm going to plan my trip to France now. but not necessarily according to this book. I'll see you in a week. In the meantime, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Bye.